Have you ever heard someone say, how can you say God is loving when he saw evil in the Old Testament? I mean, after all, he ordered the slaughtering of the Canaanites, including every man, woman, and child. I mean, isn't that immoral of him? Let's take a closer look. Some things to consider are God is the author of life, so he can take it whenever he pleases. Besides, in the Christian worldview, no one dies. They just get relocated and nowhere. Does it say that any of the innocent men, women, and children weren't relocated to heaven? Now, these are all true. But if we're being honest with ourselves, they may not be sufficient answers to ultimately understanding God's actions at some points in the Old Testament. So, let's take a closer look. Still first, let's examine why God chose to judge the Canaanites. What exactly were they doing? Well, they were participating in temple prostitution and bestiality, amongst other things. But perhaps the most detestable thing they were doing was sacrificing their babies to the molten god Molech. In fact, what they would do is set a fire at his feet and wait until the metal statue became scorching hot. Then they would place the babies in his arms and they would literally melt and sizzle from the heat. In fact, their screams were so loud that they often had many loud drummers playing outside the city gates so that the mothers and families of these children wouldn't hear their shrieks. You see, God knew what was going on, and in fact, he gave them 400 years to change talk about a patient God, but they did not, so God had to judge them. Remember, part of love is to seek justice. That's why if someone harms your loved ones, you should seek justice for their actions, in fact. It would be unloving if someone killed your loved ones and you simply said, well, hey, that's okay. Love, love, love. And isn't it interesting that oftentimes people cry out for God to intervene in such atrocities like genocide and the Holocaust? And as Dr. Frank Turek points out, here is one situation where God chooses to intervene and stop the evil, yet he is considered a for doing. But what about the innocent women and children that God ordered destroyed? Well, not so fast. You see, as Paul Copland points out, many ancient Near East cultures at the time spoke in hyperbolic and exaggerated language. Especially in war texts, we do this all the time today. For example, one sports team may say they killed the other sports team, but that doesn't mean they're all dead. It's simply an exaggeration. We can see this often in the Bible, for example, in one verse. God says, destroy them. And in the very next verse, he says, oh, and don't intermarry with any of them. Or oftentimes in the Bible, you see mention of leaving no survivors. But shortly after there are many survivors, it can be easy to turn history into Hollywood and interpret some verses based on a perception of God. For example, take President Truman in World War II, right before he ordered the atomic bombs to be dropped, when he met with his staff privately. Do you think he sounded something like drop the bombs, even if it kills every lunatic child, or did it sound more like drop the bomb? Even if it kills every woman and child in a similar way, we have to be fair and allow the language of the time to adequately represent its culture and not ours. You see, God had a purpose for TV to order the destruction of the Canaanites because he knew if he didn't, they would rub off on the Israelites. And sure enough, they did. The Israelites adopted many of the same rituals, so God didn't play favorites. In fact, he used the same language for Judah as he did for the Canaanites. He said he would completely destroy them. But we know for sure it was an exaggeration because the whole point of salvation history was Jesus would come from that lineage. You see, while it's true that there are many tough things to understand about God, one thing we can be sure of is that he is just and no one is getting the short end of the stick. We will all be judged fairly and according to our actions. If you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe.